Hey everybody, it's Miss Phillips here with Miss Wallace.
Hi, guys.
We just wanted to check in and talk a little bit about where we would have left off in U.S. history. We were talking about the American Revolution. So let's get started with a song.
In 1765, King George said, pay a tax, no jive. The Stamp Act was the tax he tried to pay his troops in the colonies. Colonists, they said, no way, we won't pay British tax this way. This unfair tax they did not pay, that's how a new fight started. Then Patrick Henry, he said no, the colonists, they all said no. The Stamp Act taxes had to go in all American colonies. Colonists, they said no way, we won't pay British tax this way. This unfair tax they did not pay, that's how a new fight started. 1766, the Townsend Acts they tried to fix. The Townsend Acts they tried to fix on paint, glass, and tea. Colonists, they said, no way, we won't pay British tax this way. This unfair tax they did not pay, that's how a new fight started. In 1770, the king said, keep a tax on tea. The king said, keep a tax on tea in all American colonies. Colonists, they said, no way, we won't pay British tax this way. This unfair tax they did not pay, that's how a new fight started. In 1773, Virginians said, united be. They wrote to other colonies, committees of correspondence. Colonists, they said, no way, we won't pay British tax this way. Unfair tax they did not pay, that's how a new fight started. In 1773, colonists dumped some British tea. They threw the tea into the sea, the Tea Party in Boston. Colonists, they said, no way, we won't pay British tax this way. This unfair tax they did not pay, that's how a new fight started. In 1774, the Continental Congress swore to British king. They said, no more, stop the Boston blockade. Colonists, they said, no way, we won't pay British tax this way. This unfair tax they did not pay, that's how a new fight started. In 1774, Patrick Henry spoke for sure. There is no peace, and what is more, give me liberty or death. The colonists, they said, no way, we won't pay British tax this way. This unfair tax they did not pay, that's how a new fight started. In 1774, Virginia's army was secured, chased away the governor, he feared a revolution. Colonists, they said, no way, we won't pay British tax this way. This unfair tax they did not pay, it's how a new fight started.
Now that you totally remember what we've been talking about in class with the American Revolution, let's look at some people that were famous during this time period. When we start talking about people, there's going to be three different types of people, like three different groups with the revolution. There's going to be a group of people that are called loyalists. And if we break down that word loyalist, the root of the word is loyal. So the question is, who are they going to be loyal to? And they're going to be loyal to our king that's over here in England. But we learned previously that it's no longer called England, it's called Britain. So they're going to be loyal to the king over in Great Britain. And the army is going to wear these red coats that are pictured over here. So they're also going to be known as loyalists, and some people are going to call them redcoats. These people are going to stay loyal, like we said, to the king, and our king is going to be King George III. Here's a picture of him. Back then, they didn't have cameras and stuff to take selfies, so they had to paint pictures. So this is a painted picture of King George III. And he's going to be the British king during our American Revolution. He's going to pass colonial taxes and trade laws. We talked about those in 5D when we said the second trade law that prohibited ships from the colonies that could carry their own supplies. They could only use British ships. And the colonial taxes we talked about, like the stamp tax, where he taxed all paper. We also have the signed proclamation of 1763. So after that big war they fought with all the money, no one's now allowed to go into the land that they won, which made the colonists more upset than they were before the war. And he refused to respond to anything our colonists said. When they wrote him that letter and poured their heart out, and they're like, da 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 da, we don't think this is fair, he refused to even acknowledge their letter. The opposite side in the war would be our patriots. And our patriots are going to include people like Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, Patrick Henry, Samuel Adams, and John Adams. Those are going to be the 5 patriots that we're going to focus on as we go through the U.S. Revolution. And they're going to have more of a blue coat to wear as they prepare for war, and we go through and see more pictures. Want to take a second? We have our Declaration of Independence on the left, and there is an awesome song that I know you'll love by Mr. Betts. Woohoo, Mr. Betts! That I want to show you real quick.
When in the course of human events, it's necessary for some to dissolve political connections, they should give reasons and declare the causes which impel them to the separation. This we know, this we know. We hold this truth to be so evident that all men are created equal. Liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and life for rights and all. We declare independence from you. Goodbye, Britain. Goodbye, Britain. Oh, we declare independence from you. Goodbye, Britain. Goodbye, Britain. Oh, sure, these rights governments are instituted by men. The power to govern is from the consent to the governed. But when that long train of abuse becomes despotism, they must go. They must go. We hope this is a peace out. And that all men are created equal. Liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and life for rights and our alien. We declare independence from you. Goodbye, Britain. Goodbye, Britain. Oh, we declare independence from you. Goodbye, Britain. Goodbye, Britain. Goodbye, Britain. Goodbye, Britain. Oh, the king has revealed and to lost. Goodbye, Britain. Goodbye, Britain. Goodbye, Britain. Goodbye, Britain. Oh, just check out all these other causes. Goodbye, Britain. Goodbye, Britain. Don't think we have been petition for redress, only to be met with injury. We now pledge our lives for sin and not us, that we are and upright, ought to be free. We declare independence from you. Goodbye, Britain. Goodbye, Britain. Goodbye, Britain. Oh, we declare independence from you. Goodbye, Britain. Goodbye, Britain. Oh, welcome back, class. I'm Mr. Betts, and that was the Declaration of Independence.
Now, I know these videos aren't that clear and they're kind of jumpy, but we're going to post them on Google Classroom so you can see them clearer that way.
Perfect. The first person we're going to talk about, the first patriot, is going to be Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson totally lied there. The first person we're going to talk about is Patrick Henry. And you should remember a little bit about Patrick Henry from your time in Virginia studies, because he was one of those famous Virginians. Woohoo, Virginia! That we talked about. He was a lawyer and a public speaker. And when he did his public speaking, he was able to make people think the same way he thought and take action the way he wanted him to take action. And one of those famous public lines he used was when he said, "Give me liberty or give me death." And what that meant was he was willing to fight and die for the freedom that we have today in America, that we wouldn't be controlled by Great Britain anymore and what they wanted us to do. He was also a member of the House of Burgesses. This is the form of government they're using in the colonies. So he was elected by people in the colonies. And the House of Burgesses at this time was supposed to be able to make laws. But the laws they were making weren't necessarily being followed because the king was also using Parliament over in Great Britain to make laws. So that caused a lot of frustration for colonists like Patrick Henry, because they thought they were kind of in charge, but the king was actually the one who was in charge at that time. Because of this frustration, he was one of the outspoken participants in this movement to get rid of Great Britain, to become a free and independent country. He led protests, he led marches, he tried to get people to join his cause by telling them, you know, we're better off to be free. If we can't be free, that's not right. And he really wanted Great Britain to leave the colonists alone so they could be their own colony. When I go to John Adams, I love John Adams because he was from the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And I found this great video that if we were in the classroom, I would totally sing to you. But if I try to sing it while I play it, it just sounds a little weird because of the delay in the showing of the video and hearing my voice. So I want you to close your eyes a little and be like, oh yeah, I could totally hear Miss Phillips walking around the room singing this. That's our King of England.
Trials, no trade, no liberties, no tea. We've colonized America, we won't stand for tyranny. Okay. And it's too late to apologize. It's too late. I said it's too late to apologize. It's too late. Your foolish tax, spend and act, and they just won't do. Wanna make it clear we believe this much is true. All men were created with certain unalienable rights. Among these life, liberty, and the pursuit
Now, we're going to leave all of these videos in the comments, but it's portraying different, like, people that are living in the colonies. Like, when they showed all those men, that was Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin had the glasses. They're portraying them as if they're telling the king, it's too late to apologize. It's too late to say you're sorry for not reading our letters. We don't care anymore. We are going to war. He was a member of the First and Second Continental Congress. You remember back in class when we talked about the Second Continental Congress. And at that Second Continental Congress, they elected George Washington to go and lead the Continental Army. And they came up with that committee with Thomas Jefferson that were going to write the Declaration of Independence. John Adams was one of the men that was put on that committee to write this document, this world famous document, which is now in Washington, D.C. Benjamin Franklin, he was the one in the video with glasses. You always recognize him because he kind of has that big forehead with the long flowing hair. He was trained as a printer. He's one of my favorites because he comes from the city with the best football team in the NFL, right? He's from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He's going to be a journalist who owned his own newspaper, and he's going to serve as a delegate to the Second Continental Congress that we just talked about. So Benjamin Franklin's there, Patrick Henry's there, John Adams is there, and he's going to be the one who's going to gain the French support for American independence. In our next video, when we talk about all the events that took place in the American Revolution, the end of the war is going to happen partially because Benjamin Franklin is going to get the people in France to support the colonists in gaining their independence. So gaining the French to help the colonists beat Great Britain is going to prove to be very valuable. And here we go, Thomas Jefferson. You should remember him from Virginia Studies when you talked about him in 4th grade. He is going to be a delegate from Virginia, and he's going to serve in our Second Continental Congress. He's primarily remembered as a lawyer and a planter. A planter means he owned a plantation and in Virginia, and he's going to be the major author of our Declaration of Independence. I'm going to show you a quick video about Thomas Jefferson.
Thomas Jefferson, the 3rd president. The inscription on Jefferson's tomb, which he wrote himself, reads author of the Declaration of American Independence, the Statute of Virginia for Religious Freedom, and father of the University of Virginia. He insisted that not a word more be added, although historians would add many more words to this great man's epitaph. For one thing, he was an architect. His beautiful home, called Monticello in Charlottesville, Virginia, was his creation. He designed it in every detail. Jefferson attended the College of William and Mary, and then studied law. His prominence in the Virginia legislature led to an appointment to head a committee of 5 in preparing the Declaration of Independence. In June of 1779, Jefferson was elected governor of Virginia. When the Constitution was written in 1787, he insisted that the Bill of Rights be added to provide added protection for every individual. In 1801, Jefferson succeeded Adams as president and served for 2 terms. The Louisiana Purchase in 1803 capped his achievements. The land was purchased from France for $15 million, and it nearly doubled the size of our country. After he retired from the presidency, he devoted most of his energies to the founding of the University of Virginia at Charlottesville. The university was the last of 3 contributions by which Jefferson wanted to be remembered, although he's gone down in history as one of our greatest presidents.
We're still doing this recording.
The next person we're going to talk about is George Washington. You should remember him from all the way back to kindergarten, because when we were back in kindergarten, we had to know that George Washington was the father of our country. Now that we're in 6th grade, we have to know a little bit more about George Washington. We have to know that he was one of the ones to attend the Second Continental Congress as a Virginia delegate. He was the commander of the Army. He took command of the Army in the summer of 1775. And fun fact, he did not sign the Declaration of Independence because he was too busy fighting in the New England colonies. He was fighting Great Britain for that independence that was so valuable that they wrote about in the Declaration. He was a planner, which means he owned a plantation. He was a surveyor. That was his job. And he was a military officer. Quick video, just like Thomas Jefferson, about George Washington.
Let's get started.
George Washington, our first president. George Washington's home was in a state called Mount Vernon, located on the banks of the Potomac River in Virginia. He was attracted to the military as a young man and quickly rose through the ranks in the Virginia militia. This put him in line to become our young nation's supreme military commander during the Revolutionary War. His exploits during our war for independence from England won him the respect and devotion he needed to become our first president. His leadership was unquestionably the finest any American had exhibited in his day. In May 1787, Washington headed the Virginia delegation to the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia and was unanimously elected our first president in 1789. Washington's presidency, although marked by differences of opinion over foreign affairs since our country was in its infancy, was successful. When he left office, the country's financial system was well established. The U.S. territory had been expanded, and many conflicts between political parties over the new federal government were settled. He died in this room at the age of 67 in 1799 and was interred in a tomb on his Mount Vernon estate.
Let's get started.
Paul Revere is going to be the last person we're going to talk about. No, he's not. We still haven't talked about Sammy Adams. I take it back. We're going to talk about Paul Revere. One of the things that makes Paul Revere so tricky to remember in 6th grade is when you were all the way back in Virginia Studies, we talked about another man who rode on horseback to warn people that the British were still coming. I'm going to give you a second to think back to those Virginia Studies times. He rode on horseback through the backwoods of North Carolina to warn Thomas Jefferson and others that the British were coming. It's going to be Jack Jouett. So Paul Revere is going to be similar to what you already know about Jack Jouett, except he's going to ride his horse up in New England, up in like where the Massachusetts Bay Colony is. He's a silversmith up there, so he's going to be an artisan. That's going to be his place in the colony, from Massachusetts Bay. And in the spring of 1775, he's going to ride on horseback from Boston to warn the colonists that the British were coming. And he warns them with lanterns. If one by sea, two by land. And
let me say something.
Okay.
He said, the British are coming, the British are coming. One is by land, two is by sea. So one lantern meant by land, two lanterns meant by sea. Go ahead.
Okay. And this is going to be a song. I could definitely rap this. I'm just saying. If I could do it, I would be totally down for this.
the Concord, crazy revolutionary live here. Making sure the patriots there here. Around this route, without no doubt, the British regulars are all coming out. First shot and doors riding with me. So you want my land and you were coming by sea. Already stopped in the town of Lexington. 2 warns y'all ain't got it's a matter. Better get out of the chowder. Beef for the monster back, cook them like chowder. That's the way that the British look to do that. A mustache is pointed at your face. I've seen it occur. I can tell you my print on from massacre. Been a prisoner, people of Boston. Close the harbor and it's Boston. So what? We had a team on these. Don't go and act all entirely. So we get to go and form militias. Didn't think we had the nerve, did ya? Oh man, men are just waiting until the punk British soldiers come hating. Don't you know that I'm a capital SOL? Brown beauty and I would tell. So when I got the little track, you better hear. Cause British soldiers are near. Headed to where? I'm always short, so I must leave now. I'm going straight into Concord. Welcome back, class. I'm Mr. Ben.
And we're going to post all these videos so that way you can check them out on Google Classroom. I'm also, when I upload the YouTube video, I'm going to post them in the comments. So if you can't log on to our Google Classroom, you'll be able to see them there. Phyllis Wheatley. Phyllis Wheatley is going to be an African-American woman. She's going to be born in Africa, and she's actually going to be sold into slavery as a young girl. So she's going to be a slave on a plantation, and our plantations are mostly in the South. So she's going to be living in the South as a slave girl. She is actually going to be taught by her owners to read and to write. And you have to remember, back in those times, that was not very typical. Most owners did not teach their slaves how to read and write because they did not want their slaves to be educated. So that's going to be really special that her owners, the people on the plantation that bought her, are going to teach her to read and write. And she's going to, oh, that should say wrote, that says war. Oh, typo. That should say wrote poems and plays supporting colonial independence. So she's going to be a major voice in the Revolutionary War. Through her poetry, people are going to repeat her poems. That's going to inspire them, just like how Patrick Henry talked and his words inspired people. Phyllis Wheatley's words are also going to inspire people. The third group that we're going to talk about are going to be neutralists. These are going to be people that are kind of like staying neutral. There's going to be colonists that are mad at England. There's going to be people from Great Britain that are mad at the colonists. And these are going to kind of stay in the middle. They're not going to pick sides. They're like, well, you know, both sides have good points. We could go either way. We're just going to kind of mind our business and stay out of it. If you needed to choose, are you going to be a patriot, a loyalist, or a neutralist? What would you be, Miss Wallace?
I would be a patriot.
All right. So if Miss Wallace is going to be a patriot, she is going to be with about 2/5 or 40% of the colonists. 40% of the colonists are going to be patriots, just like Miss Wallace.
Fight the war.
About 20% are going to be loyalists. So there's more people that are going to be on Miss Wallace's side with all our patriots like Thomas Jefferson than are going to be loyal to the king. And about 40% of the colonists are also going to try to stay neutral. They're not going to take sides. They're kind of going to let it ride and see what happens. Now, these are all questions that are found in your interactive notebook. So if you check out Google Classroom, we've put a PDF of your interactive notebook on there. And if you scroll down in the PDF, you'll come to our writing questions. Remember, we're trying to write in complete sentences with capitals and periods. Woohoo! So our first question is going to be, what makes an individual a key individual? So when we talk about key individuals, we were talking about people like King George III, Patrick Henry, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. What makes them a key individual for the Revolutionary War? And what characteristics play a part in making and shaping history? So I'm going to pause for a couple seconds and let you think. And our answer is going to be, key individuals were important people who helped to create our country's future as a free and democratic nation. Characteristics are going to be things like bravery, strong beliefs, and motivation are characteristics that play an important part in making history. As you can see from the answers on your screen, we've restated the question so people know what we're talking about. And our characteristics are not just limited to those three: bravery, strong beliefs, and motivation. You can really come up with a long list of characteristics that these great men possessed. Our next question, and my font turned out a little tricky for this one, but it says, who was King George III? And what role did King George III play in the American Revolution? If I restate the question, I'm going to say, King George III was the British king during the American Revolution. He passed colonial tax and trade laws, signed the Proclamation of 1763, and refused to respond to the colonists.
Now, what's the Proclamation of 1763? And we talked about that. That's when the colonists wanted to move westward, but the king said, no, you can't, because they said the Indians were kind of hostile. And so he had this imaginary line near the Appalachian Mountains and said, nope, you cannot go past that. And that really made the colonists mad. That's it.
Who was Patrick Henry? What role did Patrick Henry play in the American Revolution? Patrick Henry was a lawyer and a public speaker from Virginia. He is most well known for urging his fellow colonists with his immortal words, "Give me liberty or give me death." Who was John Adams, and what role did John Adams play in the American Revolution? John Adams was a lawyer from the Massachusetts Bay Colony. He served as a delegate to the First and Second Continental Congress and championed the cause for independence. Who was Benjamin Franklin? What role did Benjamin Franklin play in the American Revolution? Benjamin Franklin, elected as a delegate from Philadelphia, woo, Eagles, Pennsylvania, he became a prominent member of the Second Continental Congress. Franklin traveled to the country of France to help gain French support for American independence? Who was Thomas Jefferson? What role did Thomas Jefferson play in the American Revolution? Thomas Jefferson was a young lawyer and a planter from the colony of Virginia. Sent as a delegate from Virginia to the Second Continental Congress, he became the major author of the Declaration of Independence. George Washington. Who was George Washington, and what role did George Washington play in the American Revolution? And this is when we only talk about what he did until the American Revolution. He's done a lot of other good stuff, but at this point in time, George Washington was a planter, a surveyor, and a military officer from the colony of Virginia. While attending the Second Continental Congress as a delegate, Washington was elected Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. Who was Phyllis Wheatley? What role did Phyllis Wheatley play in the American Revolution? Phyllis Wheatley was America's first African-American poet. Phyllis wrote poems and plays supporting colonial independence. Who was Paul Revere? What role did Paul Revere play in the American Revolution? Paul Revere was a silversmith from the Massachusetts Bay Colony. In the spring of 1775, he set out from Boston to warn the colonists that the British were coming. Okay, and then the last page that we have for a review is going to be a review of the continents. Woohoo, continents! Think back all the way to the beginning. If I look at number 1, do you know what continent that is? If you said South America, you're right. Woohoo, South America! Number 2. I'm hoping everyone gets this because this is where you live. You can see the tip of Florida right here. You should have said North America. How about this one? What continent is this? This is going to be the continent of Africa for number 3. Gonna go to that bottom row. What continent is number 4? You can see Great Britain right here. So you should have said the continent of Europe. Our next one. What continent am I? That's going to be the continent of Australia. And the last one on this page, number 6. That's going to be where Russia is, and it's going to be the continent of Asia. So I have South America, North America, Africa, Europe, Australia, and Asia.
Remember that song?
Oh, that's what I was thinking. North America, South America, Africa, Europe, and Asia, Australia, Antarctica. All right. This is a little tricky. This is a different view than we're used to looking at. This is going to be my view if I was looking straight down on top of my globe. And that's going to be the continent of Antarctica. So that's what Antarctica looks like. What two continents make up Eurasia? Hopefully you said Europe and Asia. What lines on the globe measure how far north or south a location is from the equator? If you played our Kahoot game the other day, this was the question that we got wrong the most. And the correct answer is going to be latitude. The equator is going to be a line of latitude.
Now remember, longitude goes up and down. It's long.
What is the name of the ocean whose waters are south of 60 degrees south latitude? So what body of water is towards the south? Kind of gives it away when it says its name, when it tells you the description, because that's going to be our Southern Ocean. What lines on the globe measure how far east or west a location is from the prime meridian? Miss Wallace just gave you a hint on that one.
It goes up and down.
Those are going to be lines of longitude. Now the last one's a little tricky. If I were doing it, I would have to write them all down, especially all those A continents.
Yeah.
To make sure I had them in order. All right, I got them all written down. So if I was putting them in alphabetical order, I would list Africa, Antarctica, Asia, Australia, Europe, North America, and South America. How'd I do, Miss Wallace? Did I get them all right?
Yes.
All right, so that's pretty much all we have for you today. We're going to see how this goes, and we're going to work on another video for you. We're also going to post some new flashcards for our next set that we're going to talk about on to Google Classroom. And I've had some requests to play Quizlet, so we'll look into that too. I know Kahoot was a little tricky because if you couldn't get a strong internet signal, it would drop you from the game. So totally apologize for that. I really appreciate how everyone is working really hard to do the best they can with this situation. Miss Wallace and I really miss you guys. We call each other and talk about what we would be doing if we were in school with you. I'm looking for Miss Wallace's 2A class because I heard you've made signs for me, I think. Is it 2A?
Yes, remember 2A? We made signs. We were going to sing that song, No Way. March through her classroom. We're still going to do it. If we have to come, you have to come downstairs next year. We're going to march to her classroom.
So we miss you guys. Hopefully you're making the best of the situation. Stay safe. Keep your social distancing so we can all see you again soon.
Bye, guys.